Barney Miller wasn't just a sitcom, it was a snapshot of an era. The faces felt familiar, comforting, almost ordinary. But behind those familiar roles were lives shaped by illness, scandal, disappearance, and unexpected survival. What happened after the cameras stopped will shock you, and in some cases, break your heart. Hal Linden as Captain Barney Miller. Captain Barney Miller, the moral center of the 12th Precinct in Barney Miller, was portrayed by Hal Linden. At 44 years old, he embodied a police captain who ruled through restraint, intellect, and quiet authority rather than force. The performance relied on silence, pauses, and emotional control, turning understatement into power. That choice made the character feel unsettlingly real. Hal Linden, born Harold Lipschitz on March 20th, 1931, in the Bronx, New York City. His father, Charles Lipschitz, a Lithuanian immigrant, ran a small printing shop that barely sustained the family. Money was never abundant, and failure was never acceptable, creating a childhood shaped by pressure rather than comfort. Music became his escape, and that same discipline would carry him to Broadway success, culminating in his Tony Award-winning performance in The Rothschilds. Marriage became the most stable structure in Linden's life. He married dancer Fran Martin in 1958, and together they raised 4 children, building a private world far removed from Hollywood volatility. While Barney Miller brought visibility and 7 Emmy nominations, Linden balanced family life with stage work and educational television rather than chasing fame at all costs. The marriage endured more than 5 decades, outlasting trends, networks, and critical favor. When Barney Miller ended, he transitioned into hosting and narration, winning 2 Daytime Emmy Awards for FY1 during the mid-1980s. Later, he returned to music with the album It's Never Too Late, recorded not as a comeback, but as proof that his voice still mattered. His career during these years was quieter, deliberate, and resistant to disappearance. Today, Hal Linden is 95 years old, living largely outside the spotlight. His estimated net worth stands at approximately $3 million, built slowly through decades of stage, television, and music. Max Gail as Detective Stan Wojo Wojciechowicz. Detective Stan Wojo Wojciechowicz, the emotional core of Barney Miller, was played by Max Gail. At 32 years old, he portrayed a detective whose openness and insecurity set him apart inside a hardened police world. Wojo was earnest, wounded, and visibly human, refusing the armor worn by others. That vulnerability became the character's lasting imprint. Max Gail, born April 5, 1943, in Detroit, Michigan. His father, Maxwell Trowbridge Gail, was a businessman who valued stability, while his mother, Mary Elizabeth Scanlon, emphasized education and restraint. Gail followed that path outwardly, earning advanced degrees and even teaching, but the internal tension between safety and self-expression never eased. Choosing acting meant abandoning certainty, and years of stage work finally led to recognition through Barney Miller, earning him 2 consecutive Emmy nominations. Marriage brought both love and devastating loss. Gail married Willie Beer in 1983, and their life together was cut short when she died of cancer in 1986, leaving him to raise their daughter India alone. The shock reshaped everything. Career priorities shifted, ambition slowed, and grief took center stage. He later married Nan Harris in 1989, had 2 children, Maxwell and Grace, and the marriage ended in 2000. Since then, Gail immersed himself in meaning-driven work, including the documentary Hoxie, When Healing Becomes a Crime, while continuing acting in projects like DC Cab and later 42. Recognition returned unexpectedly decades later when he joined General Hospital, winning Daytime Emmy Awards in 2019 and 2021. Now, Max Gail is 83 years old and selectively active in acting and production. His estimated net worth is around $6 million, accumulated through long-term television work, directing, and his late career revival. Ron Glass as Detective Ron Harris. Detective Ron Harris, the articulate presence inside Barney Miller, was portrayed by Ron Glass. At 30 years old, he played a detective whose authority came from language, composure, and intellectual control. The role rejected physical dominance and replaced it with precision. That contrast made him instantly distinct within the squad. Ron Glass was born on July 10, 1945, in Evansville, Indiana. His early life followed academic path, forcing him to build confidence through education instead of exposure. He pursued drama and literature at university with unusual seriousness, training his voice and thought before ever training his image. Early television appearances on shows like Sanford and Son and All in the Family tested that discipline long before stability arrived. Ron Glass never married and chose a private life shaped by structure rather than companionship. He devoted himself to work, belief, and routine, keeping emotional distance even as recognition grew. During and after Barney Miller, that self-containment carried him into roles defined by moral weight, most notably Shepard Dariel book in Firefly and the film Serenity. His characters often stood slightly apart, observing rather than chasing belonging. In his later years, Ron Glass faced declining respiratory health that gradually limited his physical strength. The condition reduced his professional activity and ended any sustained return to long-form television. Finally, he died at 71 years old on November 25, 2016, from respiratory failure. He was interred at Rose Hills Memorial Park in Whittier, California. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was about $10 million, earned through decades of steady television, film, and voice work. Steve Landesberg as Detective Arthur Dietrich. Detective Arthur Dietrich, the unshakable intellect of Barney Miller, was portrayed by Steve Landesberg. At 39 years old, he played a detective whose power came from logic, memory, and restraint. Dietrich never rushed, never raised his voice, and never lost control. That stillness became his signature. Steve Landesberg was born on November 23, 1936, in the Bronx, New York. Entering show business late placed him at a disadvantage, forcing him to compete against younger performers with faster momentum. He relied on intelligence and verbal precision, building a reputation through stand-up comedy and television appearances. Barney Miller gave him permanence, and the role brought 3 Emmy nominations that confirmed his distinct value. Marriage arrived after recognition. Landesberg married Nancy Ross in 1986, and they had a daughter, Elizabeth, giving him personal stability during years of professional confinement. Despite success, he struggled against being narrowly defined by Dietrich, which restricted casting options. He continued working across television and film, later appearing in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, showing adaptability even when the industry resisted change. Steve Landesberg's final years were shaped by colon cancer. Treatment and decline limited public appearances and closed the possibility of a full career revival. The disease ended a life built on mental sharpness and control, qualities the illness gradually stripped away. Sadly, he died at 74 years old on December 20, 2010, from colon cancer. He was cremated, and public confusion about his age only cleared after his death. His estimated net worth was around $4 million, built from television, stand-up comedy, and film. Jack Sue as Detective Nick Yamana. Detective Nick Yamana, the quiet, dry-humored presence in Barney Miller, was portrayed by Jack Sue. At 57 years old, he played a detective whose calm intelligence and understated wit cut through every scene without effort. His character never needed to dominate the room to be remembered. The impact came from timing, restraint, and an unmistakable sense of lived experience. Jack Sue was born on October 28, 1917, during a voyage across the Pacific Ocean, and grew up in Oakland, California. His childhood was shattered during World War II when he was forcibly sent to the Topaz War Relocation Center because of his Japanese heritage. That early injustice shaped both his voice and his resolve, later visible in performances such as Flower Drum Song. Marriage gave him stability after years of displacement. Jack Sue married Jans Delar in 1945, and together they raised 3 children, building a family life that existed quietly beside his career. Even as Barney Miller elevated him into a household name, he remained cautious about the roles he accepted, refusing parts that leaned into racial caricature. Illness entered his life while his most important work was still unfolding. Jack Sue was diagnosed with esophageal cancer during the later seasons of Barney Miller, a condition that rapidly weakened him while the series continued without pause. He missed episodes, returned briefly, and delivered his final lines with visible effort. Jack Sue died at 61 years old on January 11, 1979, from esophageal cancer, passing away during the run of the series that made him unforgettable. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $2 million, built through nightclub work, Broadway, film, and television. Abe Vigoda as Detective Phil Fish. Detective Phil Fish, the weary, blunt, unforgettable figure in Barney Miller, was portrayed by Abe Vigoda. At 54 years old, he played a detective whose exhaustion felt authentic rather than exaggerated. His presence carried weight, history, and a body that looked like it had already lived too long. That realism made him impossible to replace. Abe Vigoda was born on February 24, 1921, in Brooklyn, New York. He left school early to work as a printer, then entered the military during World War II, returning with discipline but no shortcuts into the arts. Acting came slowly, through theater and radio, before film finally noticed him in The Godfather and The Godfather Part II. By the time Barney Miller arrived, he already looked like a man who had paid his dues twice. Marriage shaped his private life in distinct chapters. He first married Sonia Golke, and they had a daughter, Carol, before divorcing. Later, he married Beatrice Shy in 1968, a relationship that lasted until her death in 1992, leaving him widowed. During the height of Barney Miller, his character's popularity led to the spin-off Fish, a rare opportunity that ended abruptly when the series was canceled. For decades, false reports of his death circulated, turning him into a running joke while he was still working. He leaned into the irony, appearing in commercials and interviews that mocked the rumors, even as time visibly caught up with him. Sadly, he died at 94 years old on January 26, 2016, passing away in his sleep at his daughter's home. He was buried at Beth David Cemetery in Elmont, New York. His estimated net worth was around $10 million, earned across film, television, theater, and a career that outlasted its own obituary many times over. Ron Carey as Officer Carl Levitt. Officer Carl Levitt, the relentlessly ambitious presence behind the precinct desk in Barney Miller, was portrayed by Ron Carey. At 39 years old, he played an officer whose hunger for promotion never quite matched his stature. The role leaned into insecurity, frustration, and suppressed resentment. Levitt felt like a man constantly measuring himself against taller shadows. Ron Carey was born on December 11, 1935, in Newark, New Jersey, and grew up in an Italian-American Catholic household. He excelled academically, served as class president at Barringer High School, yet endured constant ridicule for his short height. Humor became defense, and speed of thought replaced physical presence. That survival instinct carried him into stand-up comedy, eventually opening doors to screen work and steady roles in projects such as High Anxiety. Marriage provided Carey with stability that his career often denied him. He married Sharon Boyaronis in 1968, and their relationship lasted nearly 4 decades without children. While Barney Miller secured him visibility across 121 episodes, the same role boxed him in. Even with memorable appearances in History of the World, Part 1, His height and persona limited how far casting would let him go. In final years, Ron Carey suffered a stroke, an abrupt medical crisis that left no extended period of recovery or return. Sadly, he died at 71 years old on January 16, 2007, from a stroke at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was about $5 million, earned through television longevity, comedy, and film work. James Gregory as Inspector Frank Luger. Inspector Frank Luger, the blunt, intimidating authority looming over the precinct in Barney Miller, was portrayed by James Gregory. At 63 years old, he embodied an inspector whose voice alone could halt a room. The role relied on severity rather than warmth. James Gregory was born on December 23, 1911, in New York City. His early years offered little glamour, pushing him toward structure, service, and endurance. He began acting on Broadway in 1939, then paused his career to serve in the U.S. Navy during World War II, returning older, hardened, and vocally unmistakable. That presence later defined performances such as Senator Iselin in The Manchurian Candidate and General Ursus in Beneath the Planet of the Apes. Gregory's private life was marked by long-term commitment rather than volatility. He married Ann Miltner, and their marriage lasted more than 58 years, spanning war, theater, film, and television. While his screen persona projected menace, his home life remained consistent and private. However, time gradually narrowed his roles as he moved into supporting appearances and guest work. His final credits ended a career that stretched across radio, stage, film, and television. Sadly, he died at 90 years old on September 16, 2002, from natural causes in Sedona, Arizona. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $2 million, built through decades as one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors. Barbara Barrie as Elizabeth Miller. Elizabeth Miller, the private counterweight to a public life in Barney Miller, was portrayed by Barbara Barrie. At 44 years old, she played a wife whose limited screen time carried emotional consequence rather than decoration. Her presence suggested what the precinct could never show. Barbara Barrie was born on May 23, 1931, in Chicago, Illinois, and raised in Corpus Christi, Texas. She completed high school early and initially studied journalism before committing fully to drama, a shift that demanded starting over with no guarantee of return. Her early stage discipline translated into film work that carried social risk, most notably One Potato, Two Potato, a performance that won her Best Actress at Cannes. Marriage intersected directly with her professional peak. Barrie married Jay Harnick in 1964, and during the years she balanced family life with demanding roles, she navigated abrupt creative changes on Barney Miller that removed her character from the series. Rather than retreat, she pivoted toward film and theater, delivering a defining performance in Breaking Away, which earned her an Academy Award nomination and reaffirmed her standing outside sitcom television. Health later imposed limits that reshaped her output. In 1994, Barrie was treated for rectal cancer, an experience that interrupted work but did not end it. Years later, a diagnosis of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis reduced her physical stamina, gradually narrowing stage and screen opportunities. During this period, she turned toward writing and selective acting. Now, Barbara Barrie is 95 years old, living quietly after decades of sustained artistic relevance. Her estimated net worth is around $4 million, accumulated through a career defined by critical respect rather than constant exposure. Gregory Sierra as Detective Chano Amengual. Detective Chano Amengual, the combustible presence inside Barney Miller, was portrayed by Gregory Sierra. At 38 years old, he played a detective whose volatility challenged authority rather than reinforcing it. The role carried tension into every exchange. Gregory Sierra was born on January 25, 1937, in Manhattan, New York, and grew up in Spanish Harlem under unstable conditions, raised by an aunt rather than his parents. That early displacement shaped his emotional edge and sharpened his instincts for survival. Structure arrived later through military service and formal acting training, opening the door to steady television work. Before Barney Miller, he gained recognition as Julio Fuentes on Sanford and Son. Marriage became a source of both connection and rupture. Sierra married Eileen DeFelita in 1969, and the relationship ended in divorce 3 years later. A second marriage to Susan Pollock in 1976 ended tragically when she died by suicide in 1978, a loss that deeply affected him during the height of his television exposure. Professionally, he left Barney Miller to lead AES Hudson Street, a decision that stalled his momentum when the series was quickly canceled. Illness later narrowed the final chapter of his life. Sierra developed stomach and liver cancer, a condition that gradually limited his capacity to work. Even so, his later years included appearances that reflected his enduring intensity, including roles in Miami Vice and film work such as Deep Cover. The physical decline closed a career defined by urgency and force. Gregory Sierra died at 83 years old on January 4, 2021, after a prolonged battle with stomach and liver cancer in Laguna Woods, California. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was about $2 million, earned through decades of persistent screen work. Lavin as Detective Janice Wentworth. Detective Janice Wentworth, the sharp, self-possessed presence briefly cutting through the early years of Barney Miller, was portrayed by Lavin. At 37 years old, she played a detective whose authority was intellectual rather than physical. Her scenes were measured, precise, and quietly disruptive. Lavin was born on October 15, 1937, in Portland, Maine. She was already on stage by the age of 5, learning discipline before childhood ease could settle in. Formal training followed quickly, and by the time she entered professional theater, she carried unusual technical control for someone so young. Early stage successes such as It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman and the Mad Show positioned her as a performer of intelligence. Marriage intersected directly with her career's volatility. Lavin married Ron Ludman in 1969, and during that period her television visibility expanded but also narrowed. After leaving Barney Miller, she stepped into the lead role of Alice, a decision that brought enormous success, 2 Golden Globe wins, and an equally powerful label that followed her for years. Later marriages to Kip Niven and Steve Bakunis coincided with her return to stage dominance, including a Tony Award win for Broadway Bound, proving she could still command prestige beyond television. Illness arrived late, but decisively. Lavin was diagnosed with lung cancer, a condition she continued working through rather than retreating from. Even as treatment progressed, she remained active, appearing in projects such as Be Positive and the series Mid-Century Modern, filming until only months before her death. Sadly, she died at 87 years old on December 29, 2024, from cardiopulmonary arrest due to complications of lung cancer in Los Angeles. At the time of her death, her estimated net worth was $10 million, earned through a career that refused to end quietly. George Murdoch as Lieutenant Ben Scanlon. Lieutenant Ben Scanlon, the suspicious, unyielding force pressing down from internal affairs in Barney Miller, was portrayed by George Murdoch. At 45 years old, he played authority as weight, not volume. His characters never reassured. George Murdoch was born on June 25, 1930, in Salina, Kansas, growing up as one of 7 children in a household. Space was limited, attention divided, and ambition had to be fought for. His early years forged a presence that later translated into imposing screen authority. Before television recognition, he built credibility through theater and character work, eventually breaking through with roles like Dr. Salik in Battlestar Galactica. Marriage brought personal stability, but professionally he entered a period of confinement. Murdoch married Kathy, and while his private life steadied, his career narrowed into authority figures, judges, generals, and enforcers. In Barney Miller, Scanlan became his most recognizable form, followed by emblematic roles such as God in Star Trek V. Success arrived, but variety did not. Health would close the arc without warning. Murdoch was diagnosed with cancer, a battle that progressed away from public attention while his screen presence faded. His final years were marked less by new roles than by the long shadow of the ones he had already etched into popular culture. George Murdoch died at 81 years old on April 30th, 2012, from cancer in Burbank, California. He was survived by his wife and stepdaughter. His estimated net worth was around $1 million, reflecting a lifetime spent supporting stories rather than starring in them. Mario Roccuzzo as Norman DeLuca. Norman DeLuca, a face passing through Barney Miller with quiet menace, was portrayed by Mario Roccuzzo. At 35 years old, he embodied characters who entered scenes already judged. His roles rarely stayed long, but they lingered. Mario Roccuzzo was born on November 9, 1940 in Boston, and his early life was interrupted by loss that forced abrupt relocation and responsibility. Stability disappeared early, replaced by constant adjustment and self-reliance. Acting became both inheritance and necessity, pushing him into relentless work rather than selective choice. Early breaks came fast, including The Young Savages, setting the tone for a career built on endurance. Roccuzzo became one of television's most recognizable utility actors, appearing in more than 250 roles, often as criminals, suspects, or authority figures with hidden rot. Series like Hill Street Blues and NYPD Blue relied on his reliability, even as typecasting closed other doors. Illness arrived quietly at the end of a life spent working without pause. Years of constant roles left little room for rest, and when cancer took hold, the decline was swift. Sadly, he died at 80 years old on October 9, 2021, after a battle with cancer. He was laid to rest privately. His estimated net worth was $1 million, reflecting a career rich in labor but poor in reward. Time passed quietly for the Barney Miller cast, but their stories didn't end when the precinct lights went out. Behind the jokes were careers marked by sacrifice, loss, and moments of brilliance that time nearly erased. So which transformation surprised you the most? Who endured? Who vanished? And who paid the highest price after the cameras stopped? If you want more deep dives into classic TV legends and where they are now in 2026, subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments below.